All right. So Edith, what we're talking about today is, politics is never fair. And it's your saying that inspired us. Justice is never boring. Talk a little bit about yourself. And I know you say you have this baked into your DNA, and I know you didn't want to talk too much about yourself, but it really is inspirational to us about some of the stuff that you believe in and what you've been doing and what inspires you. So justice is never boring.
This is never boring, and it also isn't quick. So, I've been involved in a variety of basically social and racial justice issues for many years. In fact, since I was a child, and you probably got my Justice is Never Boring from my blog that was on our post. And one of the things I said is my first memory was being on the shoulders of my father at the March on Washington. That was probably my first engagement in the political sphere.
What year was that? Are we talking? What year?
63, and I was probably, I won't tell you how old I was because then you can tell.
It's okay. Age is great.
But I was very young, so it was kind of the beginning for me. And one of the things I've always done, both locally and nationally and internationally, is look at kind of how to give back, how to make sure that, we have a responsibility to each other. It's just kind of one of the things that fuels me, because for whatever I give, I always get back from the work that I work on. And so it's just something I really enjoy doing. And my ACLU tour, I worked for an advertising agency for a number of years. And anyone who knows and has worked for an advertising agency knows that it can be kind of soulless sometimes. Right. Fun, but sometimes soulless. And I chose at the end of my career that I really wanted to do something that I thought would make a difference as far as my professional life, and joined the ACLU of Virginia about a year ago. And again, I tell people it's not fun work, but it's certainly fulfilling work.
Yeah, and I like that you reminded us it's never as quick as you would like it to be. I was thinking about that when I was actually down here walking around, thinking some of the big problems we have, especially around justice and voting rights specifically. I know a lot of people right now, this is a huge worry, from civil rights, voting rights, all these important issues. And I always try to comfort myself with those words, that slow arc of justice. But I'm like, is this really going to work, this waiting, or do we have to move hot and fast in this moment? So what is your point of view on what's important that the ACLU is concentrating on in the realm of voting rights, specifically in Virginia? Can you just give our audience some ideas around what's very important for them to keep in mind?
Sure. So quickly, I'd like to, and this is my cat, quickly, I'd like to keep in mind that, everyone to keep in mind that, Virginia One did do some phenomenal work probably a couple of years ago on moving forward some voting rights, kind of issues, things like, the language access, which just comes into effect in September of this year, same day, which will come into effect in 2022. Looking at voter ID stuff. So making some really great strides that other states in the South just haven't. In fact, at the ACLU, we talk about, Virginia leading the South. Mm-hmm. But what we also have to keep in mind is that none of that is promised, and that it can change at a wink of an eye based on the whoever is in the administration and whoever is, sitting in the Senate, sitting in the House. And so it's really important that we remain diligent around that. And one of the things, if you're aware of, is the Right to Vote Amendment, where we're really trying to make it, kind of a constitutional amendment that everyone has the right to vote who is 18 and older, period, full stop. And that could never be taken away from because it would be a part of the Constitution. So one of the things that, I like to just point out is that in 1902, the Constitution Convention that was held put in a variety of amendments, et cetera, that really were designed to strip the vote from Black folks. It was as simple as that. It was the end of Reconstruction. Mm-hmm. There were more Black folks in Virginia than there were white folks. And people, very prominent people, were very concerned about that. And through that legislation, things like vagrancy became a crime, things like indebtedness became a crime, things like, idleness became a crime. And, that doesn't sound like that's possible, but it absolutely was. And it's something that has gone throughout our criminal justice system for years. And that language is still in our Constitution. And so that is why it's important that the right to vote amendment passed. Now, the first, I don't want to get into a whole lot of technical, but the first phase was that it had to pass in the last general session, and it did. And I'll be very clear and say it passed, and we at the ACLU are pleased, but it wasn't what we wanted. Because we wanted everyone to have the right to vote, including those who were currently serving as felons. And that was a carve out that was put into it. But, sometimes you have to go for getting an incremental change if you can't go all the way to the wall. So the new, the amendment passed, but for it to be part of the Constitution, one, it has to pass again exactly the same way it passed the last time. It has to pass in this upcoming General Assembly. And then after that, it goes to the ballot in 2022. Wow. And it'll be up to all of us to do the work that we need to do to inform people to go out and vote.
Right. No, I want to ask for Virginia people in the room, I'd love to see a raise of hands. Who knew this? Who knew this procedure? I mean, I'm learning something new. Did we know that this would happen? And so we really do got to pay attention for this this year. So I love that you reminded me of this the other day, because truthfully, it wasn't on my radar. So thank you for that. Look at all the hands up. Good. So some people did know. That's awesome. And a lot of us need to learn, because this is really great, because we need to have action around this. So sorry to interrupt, but I really like to see what people are really know about. So that's great.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, that's really important. And it's important that, you press for it, and it's really important. I'm going to just bring it back. Then I will say, I'm going to preface this by saying the ACLU is a nonpartisan organization.
Exactly. Oh, so sorry. Yes, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the results of the election certainly can have an impact on what happens when this amendment comes up again.
Do you find Republicans are supporting this amendment?
There is some bipartisan support of the amendment.
Okay.
But again, it did pass kind of straight up party lines.
Okay, that's also good to know. So let's talk about ACLU, and we talked about your priority areas in Virginia. The reimagining policing, people not prisons, and right to vote. We kind of covered some of the right to vote. Let's talk about those two other really important areas.
Sure. So reimagining policing is really about the fact that, we really need to think about policing from the perspective of, what are the implicit biases that are baked into our policing system? Mm-hmm. What is the systemic racism that's baked into our policing system? And we have to acknowledge that, kind of what happens, particularly in Black and Brown communities, is not kind of incidental, and it's not coincidental. The system works the way the system was designed to work. And so in our policing work, we are working very hard on providing a alternative to qualified immunity. As you know, police have the opportunity whenever they're being sued to, plead qualified immunity. It's like a shield, which basically keeps folks from suing them. And so it's really important that, we look at that legislation. It has gone up twice. Right. It has failed twice. And typically what happens is when it goes up, police begin talking about things like, oh my God, if we pass this, then, there are going to be more lawsuits. There are going to be less people who want to be police. There are going to be, all of this. And to be frank, our perspective is, if you're afraid of that many lawsuits, and so we're really, kind of really focused on that. We're focused on things like, bringing police out of out of traffic enforcement, because traffic enforcement often unravels into really terrible things happening. And really, and looking at things like kind of how, police interact with, communities through, community review boards, decertification, those kinds of
And
things.
how about training? Like, it feels like to me that what a lot of this is around with anything is actually reimagining what it means to be a police officer. Like,
I think so. I think so. I mean, but there's something that's also systemic about it. I mean,
right,
the fact of the matter is that the police departments all over the country spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars on training, and it's not, significantly making a difference. And so a lot of it is about things like, who are you hiring, and what are you telling police their jobs are,
yes,
and who are you engaging? I mean,
right,
and again, a lot of things that come up around police misconduct have to do with, for example, them engaging with with people having mental crisis,
right, no doubt.
which they obviously haven't been trained for.
No,
So
and
perhaps they shouldn't be involved in that.
well, yeah, I do think, yeah, it really comes down to, like you said, in some countries, it's just when they reimagine it, and like you said, you have to break the system. You can't just tweak it or do whatever. It really has to be reimagined, and to just like, you can't use those same ingredients like you're baking a cake. You got to figure it out, because like you said, if it's baked in, then you have to figure out really how to remake it, and in a way that serves society and it's positive. And you see it. And when I went to England, I didn't notice any of the police officers having guns, and they were able to de-escalate. They were trained to do that. If everybody has a gun and you're trained to use a gun, it seems like to me everybody just uses their gun. You got a taser, you use a taser.
Taser, right.
You know,
And to the comment that said that most crises aren't solved by guns. I mean,
exactly.
for the ACLU, we certainly believe there's the role of police, but I think we have to reevaluate what that role is. And then we have to reevaluate who people are. And then we have to reevaluate how we're building trust in communities. I mean, there is a huge distrust break between law enforcement and Black and brown communities. And,
so,
which kind of goes into our second priority, which is people, not prisons. Because we believe that Black and brown communities have been overcriminalized. There's tons of evidence that show that Black and brown people get longer sentences. They're more likely to have interactions with police. There are more accidents once they are sentenced to be in prison longer. And I cannot stress enough how awful the prison systems are in Virginia. And they made great progress when they got rid of the death penalty, and that's a great thing. But there's still much to be done. There is still much to do, including ending solitary confinement, which actually VDOC made an announcement a couple of weeks ago that they have actually ended solitary confinement. Obviously, they didn't tell the people who were in solitary confinement they had ended it, because we've gotten tons of emails and letters and calls from family about people who are, still in solitary confinement today. And it's about oversight. And the fact that VDOC could make that comment and put it out there and, almost get a commendation from the General Assembly about it, and get a award from the Council of Governments.
right.
Because there's absolutely no oversight. There's no one that can go in there and say, no, that's not happening. That's an untruth.
Right.
And so
you talked
really
about, if you would say what they called ending solitary confinement just meant they had 4 hours outside their cell instead of 27, or wait, no, how many hours in the day? Sorry, 23. What was it? It was
20, instead of 24 hours in or 23 hours in, they now have 4 hours. Supposedly they now have 4 hours out. But again, we have had lots of letters that have said they're not even consistently giving people in prisons the 4 hours out. And so, so it's not solitary. And there, there's all kinds of things about people, who are allowed out basically go from a cell the size of a parking lot into a cage that's the size of a little bit larger parking lot. So there's a lot of work to be done in the prison system. Again, not going to happen overnight.
no.
Again, it'll take time. And a lot of our work is about looking at those budgets and looking at reallocating them for the things that make a difference, like mental health and physical health and those kinds of issues, versus more programs to criminalize and punish people.
Right.
I mean, I think that, and I'll stop, I think at the very heart, it's about, is our criminal justice system about rehabilitation or about punishment? And most often it's about punishment.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, you look at the Virginia prisons where it ranks and the profit making there, that's for profit, and the problems that went along with that. So we appreciate you speaking up for the voices that don't have that power to do so. ACLU is so important to our democracy and to the health of it. And we're so glad that you're out there making that change, Edith. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So as we said, justice is never boring. And either are this group of people, I'm putting some pressure on them, right? I'm teasing you. Some of our friends are here from the World Ground Game. I'd love to bring up first Executive Director Ian McNally and Lindley Thorne, Executive Director, and then Susan Stansel, Committees Director, if you want to spotlight all of these wonderful people. And then lastly, we'll bring up Lysandra to talk about her campaign. So what's really exciting about what you guys, when we talk about change makers, and I don't even know if you put yourself in that category, but to me, you guys have done so. When I met you a few years ago, came out to meet with, I think it was Brent Finnegan who ran, and Lindley, you were his campaign director. And there was people like Jennifer Woofter and different people who were benefited by the World Ground Game. So I would, and what we discovered is how we needed to work together, and that you guys saw an issue and you stepped up to kind of try to solve it or amend it or mitigate it. So Ian, let's start with you as Executive Director. Just tee up for our audience to tell them, what is the World Ground Game first, and why, and what's the why and the mission? And I know then Lindley will talk about the campaign part of it. So go ahead, Ian. Thank you for being here.
Definitely. Thanks for having us. So World Ground Game in 2019 really was born out of the need for a support system for rural Democrats and rural Democratic campaigns. Traditionally, we have a statewide coordinated campaign in Virginia, and we all know we have elections every year. However, in 2019, without a top-of ticket, there wasn't a huge incentive to go outside of the quote-unquote targeted mainline races. So there were a lot of Democrats that would have benefited from a larger organization like a coordinated campaign. However, they just didn't have access to that because there wasn't a statewide candidate. And that's just the nature of the beast in Virginia. So what we wanted to do was make sure that we had 14 campaigns ultimately that had access to shared resources, shared campaign tools to work together to make sure that they had a professional run campaign. So frequently we have found that candidates are asked to run, they're tapped on the shoulder, and they said, sure, I'll do this task. And then they say, okay, how do I do it? And then too frequently, they're overwhelmed with what they have to do and the lack of institutional knowledge and support and a bench to help them do so. We're really lucky in Virginia to have some very large and active and incredibly experienced Democratic committees in our urban and suburban areas. I'm thinking Nova in general. Then we have the recent emergence of really strong powerhouses like the Henrico and Chesterfield Democratic committees. And we have others across the Commonwealth. However, too frequently, we have smaller rural committees that feel really isolated, and Susan can definitely talk about that in her committee work. So what we're wanting to do is really pivot, not simply just to supporting campaigns, which we are still going to continue to do, but wanting a long-term strategy that exists before the election and after the election. Frequently, we have committees that see support, see work, see engagement for 3 to 4 months out of the year, right around the election. And then as soon as election Tuesday passes, we pack up on Wednesday and we'll see you next September. And for us to start building the Democratic brand again, to rebuild the bench out in rural Virginia and rural America in general, we have to be doing this work year round. And a lot of the consequences and some of the whys of why we're doing this, one, it's really bad for electoral politics and to be incredibly polarized. And when Democrats don't engage in places like Southwest Virginia, Central Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley, et cetera, we see things like the Second Amendment sanctuary protest movement that we saw at one point that was really scary for a lot of people. We're seeing some of the mass protests and other things to do with school boards. And past that, in addition to the moral argument there, we're also saying there's a huge strategic element. One, we can get closer to flipping some school board, some city council seats, and eventually higher level state house, state senate seats. But also, we're eating up money from the Republican campaigns. People like Dr. Fergie Reed have found great candidates, but we're wanting to make sure to support them in their work. Like Beverly Harrison was one of our wonderful candidates in 2019. She ran against Todd Gilbert, who had over $500,000 from the NRA in his bank account. What she wanted to do is tie up some of that money while advancing Democratic motivations and actual policies in her area. And she knew she was going to lose. She knew on a good day she was going to lose 80-20. She knew going in that was going to be the mechanics of her race. However, she made Todd Gilbert spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in that campaign that didn't go to Dan Helmer, that didn't go to Schuyler Van Valkenburg's race, that didn't go to other more competitive races across the Commonwealth. So we both see a moral and a moral imperative to make sure we show up for these Democrats all over the Commonwealth, not just where it's easy, but also there's a huge strategic element to what we're doing.
Yeah, and I would see that there is a value. I mean, here we have the Democratic Party of Virginia, right? That obviously the coordinated, like right now, is trying to help candidates that are running for office. But it also feels like what you guys are building really is specific to candidates that maybe need a different type of focus or type of messaging or a different kind of touch that sometimes won't work. So talk about that, like what kind of resources, and I don't know which one on the team, but like the resources that are really, really needed once you get somebody recruited into the seat. And that in itself is a job. I know Fergie has done that. I know when Virginia used to send somebody out, and sometimes they still do try to recruit, but it's really fun to say, hey, do you want to do this job? And then everybody leaves you and you're the last man standing and trying to look around for resources. But some of those resources maybe just not be apply to you or available or accessible. So talk a little bit about the importance of what you guys do in that space
I'll do a little intro to that, but I'll definitely throw it to Lindley for campaigns since that's her specific role here. A lot of the times on campaigns, fundraising is hard everywhere. Like that's just something. Having a finance director is an important role for any campaign that you want to run. Raising money in rural Virginia and rural parts of America is just harder. There is a lot of explanations and a lot of reasons that you can find for that. It's just more difficult to fund a rural campaign. And something that we so frequently see, particularly in rural areas, is that there's maybe one paid staffer on a campaign. We think of a political director, a field director, a finance, etc. That's all the campaign manager. And sometimes, like in the case of Beverly Harrison, I bring her up again, her campaign manager was her daughter and she was volunteering. So we want to recognize that rural ground game is not a sole solution for something. However, we are a huge capacity lift for a lot of these campaigns, whereas the campaign manager would have to wear 18 different hats throughout the day as a scheduler, as their call time director, or anything like that. We're able to take some of those jobs and do the busy work. A metaphor that I use way too frequently is we bring the engine, you bring the gas. We bring the structure, we bring the ability to do these things. You tell us how to plug it into your campaign. We're not telling people how to run. We're just here to provide the infrastructure. And then Lindley can definitely talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, let's go over. Yeah, Lindley, so glad to see you, my friend. And you are definitely a seasoned, I think, campaign person. You really have the feel for it and the passion. And I'm so glad you're here today. So tell us, you've seen all sides of this work. I mean, right? You've run campaigns, you've helped somebody, you've done committee work, you just really know it. And here you are now trying to really, again, stand up and build out this rural ground game with your team. Tell us the campaign part of it, what you see, what really is, what you're really trying to accomplish.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'd be careful about saying I know anything. I bring definitely a spirit of curiosity. curiosity and knowing that I want to learn. I want to be really diligent about looking at everything that we bring to a campaign and being really aware at the end of the cycle what was helpful and what wasn't, and having enough humility to throw out things that we might have thought were a good idea, but weren't actually that helpful in the end. I think of campaigns, especially in rural communities, in two ways. There's the short-term fire that's burning. You know, we got an election day coming up really soon. And we, in 2019, I was managing a campaign that was one of the 14 members of Rural Ground Game that operated as a co-op. And for me, Rural Ground Game served as my field director, operations, a little bit of finance, but it was truly a custom fit. And it was that for every campaign. But another piece that we created out of this structure was a community. That's really particularly important for rural candidates because they're geographically so spread out, and also because it can feel a little isolated in a lot of our communities. We don't often have a local elected Democratic official. And sometimes when we do, like in the case of a Washington County School Board member who recently resigned due to threats of his house being burnt down, we don't often feel like we have a structure and community of support around the work that we're doing. So it's critically important that we're making sure that we build that, and that we're stepping up to offer that support to people, both short and long term. So the immediate short term work is the capacity lift. If somebody doesn't know how to do a financial filing, we want to be there for them. We don't want them to not run because of the obstacles of not having this knowledge in their hands right away. We want to show up and provide that for them. What we're also seeing, kind of looking a little further down the path though, is that in 2019, fundraising was a lot better. Everybody was looking to Virginia for a sign of hope before we had to go into the 2020 cycle. Well, the big bad orange boogeyman is not on the ballot next year, thank goodness. But because he isn't, fundraising is not what it used to be. And here in Virginia, we're looking at potentially running campaigns for the next 3 years consecutively. That can be daunting and exhausting for anyone, but particularly for our rural candidates. We're not going to be where we need to be in terms of recruiting people, both at the General Assembly level, but I think we all recognize how important it is to build infrastructure for school board seats, board of supervisor seats, Commonwealth's attorney. Edith was talking about criminal justice reform. We want better folks serving as sheriffs in our communities, because we've seen up and down the I-81 corridor that the disproportionate rates of incarcerations for communities of color is even more significant in rural communities where there are not as many leaders of color. So that representation piece matters as well. So the Republicans have, quite frankly, out-strategized us, out-organized us for a very long time in this space. And the biggest thing that we want to do to campaign for campaigns is this. We want to make sure that they have the opportunity to have access to knowledge and resources that will help them run a professional, well-run campaign, and that they have assistance in that capacity. But what we really want to do at the end of the campaign, because a lot of our candidates are likely not going to win this cycle, we want to have a long-term path. We want them to see that they are participating in a long-term vision with laid out goals over the next 5, 7, 10 years, and that they are building into that. So what we want to do, we have, candidates for House of Delegates this year. We want to make sure that any effective messaging they come across that's really local, that connects with a lot of voters and energizes their volunteer base, that we're preserving that. We're saving that in a messaging bank. We are retaining all of that data, and that we are then looking to make sure that we're recruiting candidates within that delegate district to run for these further down ballot races where we actually are very likely to get a toehold, and that we're looking at things at the precinct level, seeing where we can truly move the needle and mark our success. We need this in rural communities because it's tough. It's tough to do the formula of showing up every year, having a fundraiser, knocking the doors, making the calls, putting the yard signs, and coming up short.
Yes.
We can make this happen, but we have to be intentional. We have to have this plan, and we have to make sure that we are preserving the legacy of every campaign. These folks are stepping up to do incredible work. They're putting themselves on the line. We need to honor the work that they do by making sure that we carry it forward for the next people that come into place. And one of the most important things that we can do there, the stewards of this legacy, are really our Democratic committees, our local Democratic committees. they're kind of the ones that can carry this over, but they need to be in a position to do that. And Susan can
Yes, you just
share a
said
little
it.
bit about that.
You have just set Susan up so beautifully, but I have to say, I love the short-term and long-term game. We know that's essential. There are a question in the chat. We'll circle back to that. Susan, go after this committee level Lindley is talking about. We're talking about this infrastructure. Tell us about this committee structure and what you think needs to happen around that, or what is happening. Give us the background of your piece of this.
Sure, thank you. You know, it is very challenging in rural Virginia, particularly out here in the far Southwest, to be a Democrat. It is very challenging to be a Democratic candidate in these areas. It's incredibly challenging to be a Democratic committee, the foot soldiers who have been tasked with one mandate, and that is to get Democrats elected. Well, you can look at an electoral map and you can see the problem we have, the high hurdle we have. The closest elected General Assembly member to us out here is Chris Hurst, all the way over in Roanoke. Beyond that, it's all red. So the committees are at a loss to a large extent about how to tackle this. Where do you even begin? What is the first step forward? The messaging out here that the Republican Party has synthesized around and focused on is everywhere. It's in media, it's in churches every Sunday, it's at Friday night football games. You can't get away from it. And the intimidation of that messaging has its effect on the ability of committees to recruit, to retain volunteers, to recruit candidates, to set realistic expectations about how to support those candidates and what we can actually do out here to do it. We're an aging population in most rural communities in Virginia. We have a brain drain. Our young people rightfully and unfortunately tend to migrate to urban areas where there are better opportunities. So our committees in large measure are made up of older individuals. We're very uncomfortable with the tools of politics these days, which would be social media platforms, which would be digital advertising, those things. We want to take these committees and build a cocoon of support around them and help them feel that there is a structure, there is a resource that will help them begin to address these problems. You know, one of the things that stymies our committees on a regular basis is how do you combat what I call the 4 Gs, which is the messaging of Republicans: gods, guns, gays, and gynecology. And when you get to those, you know, when that's what you're up against, when you're running as a board of supervisor candidate, you know, how are you supposed to pivot or manage a dialogue that has little or nothing to do with the office that you're seeking? So we want to give these committees a tool and a policy bank, best practices bank. We want to help them bring young people into their committees. And the way we see doing that is in partnership with Virginia Young Dems. We want to create positions that involve paid internships. We want high school students looking at the Democratic Party the same way they do at the Rotary clubs.
Right.
They're going to give us a scholarship. They've got a $500 scholarship. They've got a paid internship program. We want to introduce and breathe new ways of recruiting these younger people into these committees. And as Lindley said, provide them the legacy and the tools to take what they learn and bring it forward. We also want to give them an opportunity to make a direct impact on their communities. High school students, especially in this current climate, with regard to transgender policies and those things, are very motivated to have an impact on their community. We want to offer them the opportunity to do more than just make phone calls. We want to make them a living, breathing part of these committees moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it really sounds exactly what's needed. I would say even rural areas have definitely very specific challenges and also similar challenges, I think, with sometimes other committees, but definitely more. Can you guys just throw out a question about the Democratic Party of Virginia? How useful are you starting to get some help and coordinate with them? So where are they in this this journey you're on, if you want to speak to that or not. And also, this sounds good, Susan, working with all of them. I think it sounds fantastic. What are the challenges you think? Is it in the sense of going in, people signing up to be part of this, or would it be, what would it look like? Because, there's a lot of personalities, there's a lot of issues, people very guarded around if this is their committee, this committee. What's your vision about working around the issues that have been there in the past, with sometimes become big personalities, or it's hard to get on these committees, or you know what I mean?
Well,
can I take the first question about the first one first, just quickly? First wanted to say, something that as we built out this plan, and we have a lot of support from committee chairs, caucus chairs, folks within the party, former and current candidates. And one of the things I want to make really clear is that we understand why the Democratic Party focuses where they focus. Right. We have a 55-seat majority. In my own community, people have often stood for hours in line to get access to a remote area medical clinic, where they're most often having decaying teeth pulled, because that is their only access to healthcare in the past. Democrats have expanded Medicaid. We're folding dental care into that. That is a huge benefit to Virginians in every single zip code, no matter where you are. Our party is fighting like hell to maintain that majority, and that is what they need to do. They have a moral obligation to do that work, and we want them to focus there. We have met with Democratic Party of Virginia leadership in Richmond. We had a wonderful meeting with them. It was very productive. They see the value in this work. They want to be both an operational and financial partner with us in this work. We continue to move that conversation forward. We are seeking funding right now to get to where we need to be to jump in and help campaigns immediately, and then pivot towards the committee work. So we are actively fundraising. We are trying to do that in a way that does not detract from the funds that the party needs to run as hard as they can. So we're trying to be intentional about seeking funding partners that are maybe outside of their normal partnerships. But I wanted to just state very clearly and emphatically that we understand why they focus where they do. Sure. We have a much steeper hill to climb in rural Virginia, and we simply want to do the work of picking up that piece and developing a long-term strategic path to improvement in those spaces.
I love it. And with that said, we always say with money, put your Act Blue link in that chat. We have a great active group here that gets your work and would love to support it. So everybody, if you want to throw some money into that, $5, $10, $100, hey, $10,000 if you have it sitting around, why not? As I say, when I'm in the wedding suite, as I say, I can get on this little carriage and yes, here I go. Anyways, just real quickly, I want to get to Lysandra to come up, and then if you guys can stay for the after chat, Susan, maybe we can get a little deeper in some of this committee stuff. Lysandra, great to have you on. Tell us about you, and you've heard all this about running. How hard is it to run in rural area? Tell us your story, and then were you recruited to stand up? And just give us your background. Tell us about you as a candidate, and then love to hear your input about the challenges or actually benefits or to run out in your rural area. HD3, where is that exactly?
Okay, so as you know, I'm Lysandra Thompson, and HD3 is in Southwest Virginia. We cover the counties of Tazewell, Bland, Buchanan, and Russell. I'll first tell you my story. I'm a single mom of 3 children and a homesteader and a community activist. I was born and raised in Tazewell, Virginia, which is also one of the districts I'll be covering. And I started out as a community activist because there's a lot of issues that happen in the rural area that are not brought to the light. And one of the issues that was brought to the light was the Confederate statue. It was all over the news, in 2019. Let's get rid of this awful remembrance of something that happened back then. So anywho, I protested against the statue last year. And I think that's kind of where people saw something different here. They've never seen anything like that in this little town. I was deemed a Marxist. I had no idea what a Marxist was. All I knew is nobody else was speaking up for the removal of the statue. And so I wanted to stand up. And I think that's what brought to light my situation. And I've always wanted to do something for the community and change the community. I didn't know how. I started 2 organizations, Grassroots Coalition of Southwest Virginia. It's a community group. Also Grassroots Medical Marijuana Movement, which was a group where we educated everyone on medical marijuana during the legalization process. And we worked with Virginia Normal for a little bit on that. But, you know, I did get reached out from someone.
To you. How does this go? Somebody knocks at your door and says, "Hey, Lysandra, would you like to run for office?"
Well, actually, I received a phone call and they were like, "Hey, you don't know me, but I know you, and we think you should run for office." And I was like, "Me?" You know, I'm looking around like, you have the wrong number. Who are you talking to? And I really do think that's where the attention got. And so I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to try this. At first, it took me months to decide whether or not I wanted to do it. And I finally did. I decided, okay, I'm all in. I filled out the information. I was ready to go. And then a few months later, I get a call from the Workforce Center. And they're like, well, guess what? You're not a candidate. You forgot paperwork. So I had all my paperwork filled out, except for there was one paper I didn't fill out. And I feel like if I would have had guidance, that I would have had all of the paperwork done and I would be an actual candidate on the ballot this time instead of a write-in candidate.
No, that's just so important what you just said, if you had guidance. So working with the Royal Ground Game, or do you work with them now? And why is that important to you as a candidate?
It's important to me because when I started out, there's here are exhausted. You know, there's not as many members. I think I'm the youngest member in the Tazewell community Democratic Committee, and I'm 30. There's just not a lot of resources and there's not a lot of guidance here. And it's not because they don't have the capability to do it, because there's wonderful, wonderful committees here. It's just, we need more support. And when I started, you know, I knew nothing about politics. You know, I mean, not politics per se, but the process on how to be a candidate and who I needed to speak to and what steps I needed to take. So as it is, you know, I'm the campaign manager, I'm the treasurer, I am the financial advisor, I'm all of that. I do that myself. And when I came in contact with Susan and she said, you know, I have an awesome organization, RGG, and we can help you. And then, you know, I learned more about it and I was like, this is amazing. Why isn't this already around? So we need this. We need something like RGG here. I can tell you from personal experience that you do feel isolated. You feel like I almost quit twice. I'm all alone. There's nowhere to turn. There's no one to talk to about how am I going to do this? So without the guidance of RGG, I couldn't even have got an ActBlue account. You know, I appreciate them so much. And
so that's great. How can we, just because we have Polly coming up to do some art with us, but before we let you go for a second, how could people help you right now? Just round that up, and if you want to put your new ActBlue link in the chat, please do that. So how can we help you?
By supporting groups like RGG, because we need infrastructure for campaigns, for candidates. We need support from, you know, Democrats all over the country to help little Southwest Virginia. You know, we get forgotten about down here sometimes, or at least we think we do. But so yeah, any way that anybody can support us would be amazing.
You know, and I think that we always think money, but I think there's also what we add to the conversation is a lot of people have given their expertise and their talent and this is just as important when you can help candidates with or just even committees with your different talents that you can offer. So we don't want to overlook, it's just not always about money. So that's, we had, for instance, the other day, we did executive coaching for candidates. Deborah Rodman did that program. That's excellent. And that every candidate running should take something with Deborah Rodman. She is excellent. So thank you, Rural Ground Game. Thank you, Lysandra, and good luck in your race. And I'm very excited to bring next up. Let's do a little art. It's time to it's Friday, everybody. It's Friday. So we want to bring up some joy and love and some a wonderfully talented Polly. And I see Susan has her hand up already. That's good. So we'll catch you soon. Polly, how are you doing? Polly Branch. So welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, I can hear you great. So yeah,
Okay.
so tell us about yourself and your art, Polly. Glad to have you here.
Oh, you're welcome. I'll try to be brief so we can get through this. Let's see. I'm living in Roanoke, Virginia. Have been working with peace and justice grassroots groups, mostly because I like to work hands-on. I like to get on the dirt and get dirty and don't always like some of the governing styles of some of the committees. So I usually end up working hands-on with people that are ready to make signs or banners or do an art show or do a concert. And so in the 80s, I was in Richmond, so poetry slams and concerts. And, we were always integrating the information that we wanted to share with people, through the arts. And so that's
the art and activism.
Keep doing it.
Art and activism is so awesome. And I know I've seen your stuff. First of all, you're very talented and it's beautiful because you're just use so many mediums from sculpture to different things. But the pipeline, are you still involved with the pipeline protests right now?
I am. And I don't know if Robin wants to pull up that slide or how we want to do this.
Oh, you want to start? Let's go through your slide.
It's out of order. Okay.
It's okay. Let's go. You go ahead.
So that behind my picture is a photo of me, self-portrait when I was arrested in 2018 for witnessing the pipeline tree cutters. And so I had just come back at the end of the moratorium on tree cutting. They had one more day. I came with a friend. We were actually just going to sing Amazing Grace to the trees. We were outside the boundary lines, but they wanted to take us anyway. So that was an experience. I'd never been shackled before. And so that's an example of my personal art. The next slide shows a weaving project, which actually is a weaving above your head. So there's poles in a circle around a center circle, and each pole in this shot, we didn't quite have up the words yet, but each pole had an identifier. And so as a visitor was asked to come in, they would go pick up a yarn piece and go towards a pole that said something that they identified with, whether it's I'm single, I'm African American, I'm an only child, I come from someone, so on and so on, so that we would see our differences and our commonalities, and at the same time see that each one of us is an important thread in the warp and woof of our community. So it was really nice. And there's a little shot of up close looking down. It's not a real, technical weaving. It's just stretched lines of yarn. And if you are interested in that, the woman who created that project, Nancy, is at unityproject.net. So let's see where the next slide is. Where are we going? Okay, so here's an example of one of the community arts programs I've done with Bernadette Lark. We created a group in the last 5 years called Community Arts Reach. in order to try to reach out and provide some arts and opportunities to kids who are underserved or who have less access or feel less welcome to some of the traditional museums or art spaces in Roanoke, Roanoke is one of the still most segregated places in the country, so, this is a huge need, and the arts is an avenue. The next slide shows, let's see, where are we? Okay, this is one of the buildings on a street just outside the worst destruction from urban renewal in Roanoke. So I volunteered to paint the building with their logo on it to raise awareness, also just to get, have fun with people. The next step was going to be that the kids were going to decide on painted colors, but people then chose to leave it white and black for now. But it's something that can continue on. These are fish cutouts out of plywood. I was called last week for, we need a 12-foot fish sculpture in a couple of days for an action for protesting the MVP and blocking some of the bulldozers and equipment putting in the pipeline. So normally I wouldn't know that, and I probably shouldn't be showing this so soon because it's still new. But so that's that.
Yeah, you heard it on the power lunch, as we say.
Right. Oftentimes, if you're not prepared to be arrested or to be investigated, then you can choose not to know about something ahead of time, but you can still participate with one of your skills or what you're good at offering in a group. So that again is the self-portrait of me looking over. When I was there, it was interesting because the marshals and the state police that had been called out to protect the company's work, they had received a court order the night before because they were afraid that there would be a big action that day. There wasn't. It was just two of us, but they had brought out all these heavy hitters and the black vans and where they were ready to arrest as many people as possible. So they got two of us, and it was dismissed. I just had to go through that, the humiliation of being arrested. But it was kind of interesting because I knew the forest, I knew that creek. So when they put cuffs on me and my friend and led us back towards that little, I don't know if you can tell, there's a log across a little creek towards the other side. And I was familiar with how to cross the creek, but they weren't. So it was kind of interesting. I was like, well, you're not going to cross over there because it's too deep. We're going to have to go across that log. And so it was interesting. It reduced the fear basically because I was used to and familiar with my land or that land. Here is an example of just one of the kids' art projects, identifying a shiro. Henrietta Lacks is from the area of Roanoke. If you know of her story, the Gila cells.
Right.
Once, so science has been using her biology for many decades, and we want to highlight her. We're hoping to maybe switch out our Confederate monument for a Henrietta Lacks monument, which is one of the ideas. Here's a End Racism Now mural painted on the street, bringing people together and trying to find multicultural artists in the area to come out and start getting to know one another. So that's an ongoing
That's
effort.
pretty.
Yeah, and so next there's an example of a sign. If you're an artist and you want to contribute to a community group, here's a community garden center, really trying to integrate, bringing in the arts and spirituality into food security understanding and awareness. And so art, can cross all those sectors of our concerns and building relationships with one another. And this is a personal painting also of mine called Endangered Species. Brown bats are up in the one corner, and the Roanoke log perch is in the water. And this kind of represents one of the tree sitters, and the yellowfin finch, which is one of our mascots for the fracked gas pipeline resistance. And let's see, what else do we have? Okay, this is an example of brainstorming with kids or adults, doing sketches about an issue, trying to get people to ask their questions out loud that they may not have asked before. Who do I tell if I know that somebody has a gun and has been threatening my mom or a friend? Because we're still dealing with, how to help children and adults overcome that fear, but give them a safety opportunity. So it's tricky. And so many groups are trying to look at those questions. And then this, I would also encourage anybody to do. Rawtools.org is their website. They are blacksmiths who will, reforge parts of a gun, cut off the barrel of a rifle, for example, put it into the forge to melt down and reform on your property, or at a church in your town, or I want to bring it to the Civic Center, but we'll see. Yeah. So, which is also, by the way, the Civic Center is on Gainesboro property here in Roanoke, which is part of the urban renewal.
All right.
Roanoke.
Polly, that is awesome. And it's around 1:05, so I want people to stick around so we can continue our little conversation about art and activism. And I know we maybe want to talk about how people can visualize what they could do in their life. What could they just do in their imagination to change, maybe, even around issues, what they're dealing with, just to express themselves. So thank you, Polly, for being on. And thank you to all our guests. We hope you do stick around for the after chat. And if you're in the room and you're from Virginia Beach, hello, we're here. We're at the hotel. We will see you at the Garage Brewery tonight at 6:00. Senator Jennifer McClellan will be here. City Councilwoman from Norfolk, Andrea McClellan, will be kind of our guide all weekend. We're so glad Susan Parler, Susan Kaufman, Deborah's here. All the gals and friends in Virginia Beach are coming out to see us. And also Saturday in the morning, we'll be at the Smart Mouth Brewery, kicking off. Doors open at 8:30. We hope you come in for some coffee, power breakfast. We have a great program. All the candidates are coming, as I say. I just say all, just to make you curious. The Darius, I heard, is coming from Richmond. We have Keisha Evans coming. We have, I think, oh my gosh, we have at least maybe 12 or 14 candidates that will be here. So we're very excited. So thank you for joining us. And what else do I have to do? Oh, Friday, let's roll credits and we'll see you in Virginia Beach, everybody. Have a great weekend. Hot, hot, hot. Let's see it. Roll it.